We in Clare believe that artificial intelligence, or AI, will fundamentally change the way we live and work. It is also likely to become crucial in addressing society's grand challenges, such as climate, energy and mobility, food and natural resources, health, and inclusive, secure societies.
Clare strongly supports the development of AI made in Europe, with a strong focus on responsible and trustworthy AI for the benefit of all citizens. It supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and promotes two central goals, AI for good and AI for all.
Following our establishment in June 2018, we have become the largest AI network worldwide, focused on research and innovation in the world.
Europe has all the expertise needed to progress rapidly in the deployment of these technologies, but we need to direct our energy and resources towards building a coherent infrastructure to stimulate deployment and adoption, build up an effective innovation ecosystem, and drive excellent research.
Building on Europe's existing strength across all areas of AI with its strong universities, research institutions, and companies, Clare wants to ensure that many of tomorrow's advanced technologies, products, systems, and services are European and are based on and reflect European realities, needs, and values.
Trustworthy human-centric AI leverages a broad spectrum of AI techniques, including machine learning, automated reasoning, and multi-agent systems. To achieve global impact, we need large-scale investments into AI talent, AI infrastructure, as well as the effective and responsible deployment of AI systems across all sectors of our economies.
We need to invest broadly to support excellence in AI in regions throughout Europe. We need to invest in central facilities and infrastructure to bring together AI experts and other stakeholders to create critical mass and global visibility. Most importantly, we need to invest now.
Join Clare and support us in achieving our inclusive and ambitious vision for European excellence in human-centric, trustworthy AI.
The time to act is now. Join us in shaping a brighter European future.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where that you're zooming in on us now. A very big welcome to this session on AI for Good that we are organizing on behalf of Clare. I'm happy to join this session or co-host this session together with my colleague, Ricardo, who's heading the Swiss office in Zurich of Clare. My name is Hans de Kank. I am the head of the Clare office in Brussels and also co-leading the FARI initiative, Institute for AI for the Common Good. And it's actually also in that context that I also involved in AI for Belgium and the setup and development of the AI for Good working group there, which also has the involvement of one of our speakers, Astrid Van Lierde from Dalberg Data Insights. And of course, AI for Good, what do we mean by that? It's always a discussion, although it's pretty obvious that, of course, there are no such task force or working groups on AI for bad. But what do we mean by AI for Good? And that's one of the questions that we want to answer with this session here today, to give you some examples of business cases where we actually see how that AI data technology can help to achieve societal challenges that actually impact all of us. And by this, it actually also immediately answers the central vision and strategy of Clare, the largest European network organization on AI research laboratories. And that's also why we have a diversity of cases to present today. We are going in our session to have and listen experts from on three projects that have been executed around the globe, but also dealing with specific and different aspects when it comes to AI for Good. And for that, the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, I think, is the right umbrella and framework to refer to. So that's why also we are very happy to welcome, after the three business cases that we will see, also representative from UNESCO to also reflect on the concept of AI for good and how that ethics come into play there. So without further ado, I would kindly introduce the 4 speakers of today. After these 4 interventions, there will be a panel discussion, which Ricardo would kindly take over from me and guide you to that Q&A session there. So first, we will have give the floor to Florian Triclin, who is actually the digital health coordinator of the NGO Terre des Hommes. He's now joining us directly from Dakar, Senegal. But prior to that, he was active in the telecom sector, specialized in advising the operators there, and actually moved his career toward the digital sector, where he actually more and more got involved in how to integrate and use digital data and technology in developing scalable digital health tools for society and the African developing countries more specifically. After Florian, we will have a business case presented by Astrid Van Lierde. Astrid is working as a senior project manager with Dalberg Data Insights. And prior to that, she actually worked for a long time in the software sector internationally, based in San Francisco, for example, where she was general account manager for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And actually is now as a senior project manager in Dalberg Data Insights, mainly involved in setting up big projects combining the different stakeholders, donors, data scientists, and the end users to develop very important projects there, also related to the public sector. And the third case that we will have in our presentation is being brought by Bregt Roobroeck. He's a researcher and co-founder of the Urban Forestry Labs at Vives University in Belgium. And he is actually also one of the researchers who is a project leader of a citizen science project in Flanders, which is called AMAI. And he will tell us about this citizen science project, how that they actually can use AI and data technology to automate the tree crowns in Flanders, and what it will mean for the impact on the climate challenges ahead. And then we will have the intervention after that of Eloenora Lamm. She's advisor for UNESCO. She's a bioethicist on the Social and Human Science Program of UNESCO and based in Montevideo. And she's also professor and consultant of bioethics at the University of Bregt de Catalunya and teaches there, of course, bioethics at the Master of Bioethics and Law. So these are the 4 speakers of today, and for without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Florian and to present his case first in the role. Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hans, for the introduction. So I'll share my screen. Hope you see it right now. So in 2010, Terre des Hommes developed a health approach, largely based on digital health tools. In the first application, the REC, which stands for Registre électronique de consultation, is a job aid tool for health workers and is a digitization of a protocol for the care of children under 5 years old in low and middle income countries. And this protocol is called IMCI for Integrated Management of Childhood Illness and was developed by UNICEF and WHO. Here are some screenshots of the tool that is deployed in primary healthcare centers on standard tablets. This tool, which is a complex decision tree based on data entered by the health worker during the interview and the examination of the patient, leads to a diagnosis and even a prescription advice. All the data entered and calculated are recorded and transmitted to the National Health Information System when the tablet has an internet connection. Back to the approach, within the framework of this YEDA approach, this data is used by the district management team to establish supervision objectives for a team of coaches. These supervisors will be able to target the health centers and the topics that need to be addressed during the coaching sessions. And periodic reviews are held to analyze the most common mistakes made by health workers, and the topic to be addressed in training session, for instance. The approach thus makes it possible to improve the overall quality of care through better application of the IMCI protocol first, by better targeting of health workers' needs for coaching and training, and by improved quality of the data entering the information system, thus contributing to data-driven decisions. Initially developed and deployed in Burkina Faso, YEDA is now present in 4 countries and 2 are under study. In Burkina Faso, more than 85% of health centers are equipped. More than 6 million children have been seen thanks within YEDA approach, for a total of more than 13 million consultations performed with the tool. So nearly 4,500 health workers regularly use the REC, the tool, to perform their consultations. Now let's take 2 or 3 minutes to talk about the surge approach. The surge approach was developed and tested by Concern worldwide in the 2010s, primarily to strengthen the implementation of CMAM protocol for the management of acute malnutrition. The CMAM surge approach was designed to strengthen the capacity of health systems to provide quality services to acutely malnourished children during peak admissions. And the approach is based on the fact that admissions of acutely malnourished children fluctuate and can increase at certain times of the year. The CMAM surge approach uses 8 steps to help government health teams respond to relative changes in capacity and caseloads. These steps begin with an analysis of the local context, including a review of seasonal trends and known risk factors that drive child wasting and individual health facility capacity. The analysis process culminates in the setting of health facility specific thresholds that, when crossed, trigger a shift from normal implementation into a higher phase of action based on the severity of the situation. So this is the 3rd step here in the approach. Then pre-agreed surge actions and support from both governments and non-government actors are defined and costed and then formalized. Actions in the normal and alert phases are generally managed within the health facility itself, often in collaboration with communities. Thresholds are monitored on an ongoing basis by health facility staff using routine health facility data, with actions activated as soon as a threshold is crossed. The capacity of the health facility, thresholds and surge actions are reviewed on an ongoing basis and adapted as indicated in the step 8. The status of each health facility is also monitored by the higher level health authority that can in turn monitor trends across a wider geographic area on call for a higher level regional or national response if the situation continues to deteriorate. What is now a normal caseload? So this sub-step aims to establish what a normal or manageable caseload is based on what the health facility feels they can handle without overstretching themselves or sacrificing quality of care. And the information is gained through a discussion amongst the health facility stakeholders using a tool with data that comes from the patient registers. This approach with action triggered based on the capacity of the health facility is a new perspective, which is quite different from when action is triggered based on increased prevalence of malnutrition for the population in a wider geographic or administrative area. It is important to stress that the thresholds are affected not only by the overall nutrition situation and rising or falling malnutrition rates, but also by the capacity within the health facility. Thresholds should therefore be reviewed when there have been significant changes in the capacity, for instance, when the health facility has gained or lost a staff member, or changes in the infrastructure. The evolution of CIMAM surge to a broader health surge approach is in its early stages, actually. Based on the 8 steps of concerned CIMAM surge model, pilots are underway to see if the process could support in the management of other childhood illnesses, in particular in response to seasonal changes and shocks. The emerging health surge approach aims to complement existing health system processes, in particular national health management information systems and integrated disease surveillance and response mechanisms. Health surge supports the real-time monitoring by Ministry of Health staff of their health facility data of key illnesses and capacity changes, so that the planning and allocation of resources to address caseload and capacity fluctuations can occur before a health facility is overwhelmed. The aim of the health surge approach is to support the health system and empower health workers to better anticipate, prepare for, and manage fluctuations in the demand for essential nutrition and child health services. The focus is largely on managing caseloads of child wasting, malaria, diarrhea, and acute respiratory infections, as these tend to fluctuation most throughout and between years. The ability of a health center to meet demand with quality service and the thresholds beyond which service deteriorates are largely dependent on multiple factors, which vary over time and are specific to each health center. With YEDA, the health surge, so with the Terre approach, the health surge becomes extremely reactive. Routine data are automatically processed, and thresholds are instantly triggered by the corresponding alerts. So the surge IMCI is an approach based on health surge and using YEDA data in Burkina Faso, and has been developed by Terre and successfully tested in 3 health regions of the country. However, the calculation of thresholds remains a complex step, and the thresholds are not really dynamic and are rarely updated during the year. The workload would be too heavy if these thresholds had to be reviewed daily or even only monthly. So it would also be impossible to consider several variables, which will make the calculations too complex. So I'm coming now to artificial intelligence that can greatly improve this situation. For instance, it will be possible to have reference distribution model of consultations, pathologies by health facility, The alert thresholds will be calculated daily according to the season, the condition encountered in the previous days, the alerts triggered in the area, the trends, the capacity at a given time of the health center, and many other relevant variables in the health sector. The result will be the issuance of alerts adapted to the environment and to the health center's capacities, and therefore a better anticipation of the teams in charge of coordinating resources in the district and in the health facility. This optimization would lead to a sustained quality of care, even in periods of overload, and to an increased resilience of the health system. And of course, you can see that the possible applications of artificial intelligence to YEDA data are numerous. The scaling up of the tool has moved YEDA into a big data era and is forcing its managers, NGOs and Ministry of Health to introduce technologies that match the stacks and the volume of the data. There are applications in the continuous training of health workers, in the implementation of early warning systems, and in many other areas. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Florian. And we go now to the presentation of Astrid Van Lierde. Astrid, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Such an honor to be here today, and thank you so much, Hans and Ricardo, for organizing and facilitating this session. So as mentioned earlier, my name is Astrid Van Lierde. I am a senior project manager at Dalberg Data Insights, which is a company leveraging big data and artificial intelligence to develop tools to address societal and global challenges. We are mainly working in emerging countries, but we do have activities also in Europe and in Belgium. As mentioned earlier, I'm also the co-lead of the work group AI for Goods. And so today I wanted to present you some of the use cases that we are working on at the moment, which I'm focusing on how can we actually close the gender gap. We are working on different verticals at Dalberg Data Insights, such as agriculture, health, but today I wanted to focus on the vertical of gender data inclusion. So when we look at, I would say, like the spectrum of gender data, there is different way to look at it. You know, either you generate data on women, you know, to better understand how can you actually better create insightful action, or you can also provide data to women. So today I wanted to go through two different use cases that will actually provide those two aspects of the spectrum. So the first the first use case I would like to go through, it's actually a toolkit that we develop in different geographies, in Bangladesh, a couple of times in Uganda, and now in Ghana. And it's about developing a gender and economic empowerment prediction toolkits by leveraging machine learning and telecom data. So as we know, when you want to address gender inclusion, you need to have data about women. And so before going into the details of the models, I would like just to put a little bit things into the context here by coming up with an illustrative example. So when you look at the situation of women working in the agriculture sector, we know that women are producing more than half of the world's food and yet are still facing a systematic gender gap. So to address gender gap, we need information, we need data, we need information as we have about Ebo, who's a subsistence farmer, so means that she's not a commercial farmer, she's just producing food for own family, but she cannot sell it. She has 3 children, she's married, and she owns a house with her husband and would like to invest in a plot for agriculture in order to become a commercial farmer. So having such information is golden mine when you want to actually better target your campaign, action, and so on to address gender inclusion. The issue is that we don't have access to such a data. Why? Because those data doesn't exist, and if they exist, we barely have access to it. So if we want to empower women, we need to actually address the gender data gap. Having access to those information, collecting them will be very costly because you need to run survey, it takes a lot of time. When you get the result, then the data are outdated, and so on and so on. So this is why we came up with, I would say, like the concept, the idea of developing a model that can predict, based on telecom data, the gender and the women and economic empowerment of women, leveraging telecom data and machine learning. So the idea is really like looking at the mobile usage of telecom subscriber, we can predict the gender of the mobile subscriber in first instance, and then predict what is the economic empowerment of those user subscriber. By economic empowerment here, we talk about 3 different variables, because of course economic empowerment can be so many things at the same time. So we decided to just stop on 3 different variables, which is the main occupation of those women. So are they employed, unemployed, student, farmer, subsistent farmer, commercial farmers, and so on. If they have a decision power in the household, so it means like, do they have they say in decisions that are made within the context of the household? And third, if they own a land or a house, and by land meaning agricultural land. So the model that we developed aims to generate data on women's empowerment and fill the gender data gap. Sorry. So how do we did it? And really in a nutshell, because if I have to go into the details, it will take a little bit more time than 10 minutes, I'm afraid, is that we have a methodology that contains 3 phases. The first one is to launch a phone survey, ground truth phone survey. So we actually interview a representative sample of the target. So the target is the total user base of the telecom operator we are working with. And we will collect information about the gender of the respondent and the economic empowerment on the 3 variables that I earlier mentioned. So that's the first phase of the project, the methodology. Once we have the data on those on that representative sample, we're going to build a machine learning model based on what we collect through the ground truth data that will actually be able to predict on the total user base of the telecom operator what is the gender and the variables of the women economic empowerment based on the usage of the mobile usage of those subscribers. Once that's done, we then launch the models on the entire users base, and then we can evaluate the model, but also create visualization that will generate insight for organization that aims to actually close the gender gap. So by doing so, the model will provide granular, timely, and cost-efficient data about women without running like very consequent survey, just by having this prediction model that will run through machine learning. So in this illustrative example, we will know that in the Elgon area, which is the same Elgon of Abo, the women I present you earlier as an illustrative example, we have 22.6% who are exactly in the same situation than Abo. What does it mean is that if you're an organization that want to deploy resources, action in a region, you can do targeted action, because if you want to help those women to be economically empowered, you might want to provide them a loan to actually buy a new plot to become a commercial farmers. So it's all about generating tools that will help organizations to better target their action and take more insightful action. So to be more proactive rather than reactive on challenges. And of course, to address the SDG number 5, which is about gender equality. So that's the first use case I wanted to present you, which is more about generating data about women, because as we know, that's really like, I would say like the Achilles heels of the gender inclusion is to have access to women data. Even in our Western countries, we don't have enough data about women. So by developing such a model toolkit, we can actually generate data based on data that is already collected through the telecom operators. So that was the first use case. And the second one is slightly different and also come from a reflection we had, internally and conversation and so on, where based on past, events and so on, we realized that in the sphere of victim of sexual violence, there is a lot of unknown. Victims are not aware that there are services that exist, and often they are in what we call this gray zone, where they don't know if they're eligible to reach out to specific services and so on. So this is how we came up with the idea of developing a chatbot to provide insightful information and support to victims of sexual violence. We are currently deploying the project in Belgium, but the idea is, of course, to deploy it in different areas and geographies. So the name of the tool is à l'écoute, meaning like listening to you in English, and aims to three main functions. So it's a virtual portal, but it's also a virtual companion. We call it a virtual companion, but it's basically a chatbot that talks with victims of sexual violence. And by sexual violence, we mean from verbal assault to rape, and it's available 24/7. Why we decided to come up with a chatbot is because we realize sometimes that there is a barrier between the time where you a victim of a sexual violence and the time when you decide to contact a professional. And so we try to bridge that moment by providing something that is easy to be accessed, anonymous, and will provide, and that's the second feature of the tool, useful information, but also the possibility to be put in contact quickly with the right person. So we also kind of match is maybe is not the right word, but match the victims of sexual violence with the right support. It can be, like, for instance, the organization of a university, it can be a center in the hospital, it can be the police and so on, but making sure that the victim doesn't need to go through a very long and exhausting journey of trying to find the right information and the right support based on what happened to her or to him. And the last features, or functionalities of that tool, is to provide the opportunity to depose one's account of the events. So meaning like your own version of the story. So something happened to you, you just want to let your story somewhere. So we provide a virtual safe where the victim can actually let his or her story in that virtual safe that will be protected by a virtual key that only the victim is aware of. And this story allows the victim to actually preserve his or her memory and can be retrieved later to facilitate the connection with supporting organization. Why? Because often what's happened is that sometimes the victim doesn't want to testify directly, but want to make sure it's the memory is preserved somewhere, and when they will go, for instance, to the police, they will have a proof that happened at that moment. So that's one aspect, is really like to provide services information to the victim, but also to better understanding what we call the gray zone. The gray zone is, this kind of like it's not a rape, it's something that happened and the victim doesn't know if he or she eligible to contact or to reach out. And this is really what we want to cover by creating this tool that will actually provide the different features that we mentioned. A very important aspect of that project is we had to come up with something that is very secure because we are dealing with very sensitive data. So that's why we host the application on a very secure portal and guarantee state-of-the-art data governance and protection. So that was it for my use case. Thank you so much for listening. And of course, I'm always available if you have any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and giving the floor back to Hans. Thank you, Hans.
Thank you, Astrid. Great, interesting two cases with a total different angle, but indeed looking at the aspect of inclusion and gender and diversity. Thank you, Astrid. And maybe also a reminder for the audience on YouTube. You can actually, of course, post some questions if you want to, but therefore we want to kindly invite you to use slido.com. And we have a QR code there where you actually can just simply scan the QR code with your mobile phone. And this will bring you to a secure environment where you can actually submit your questions that then can be handled during the panel session after the two interventions or two presentations that we are still have on the program. This next speaker is Bregt Roobroeck from Vives, who is going to bring us to a totally different aspect of the Sustainable Development Goals challenges there, the climate change, and explain to us how a citizen science project, the MI project, and nature can meet. So, Bregt, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for hosting this. I will share my screen, but I cannot share it for the moment. Can you access me to share it?
Should be good.
Now is going well. Okay. I hope you can see it now.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. So we are trying to do with Eurosense. Eurosense is a remote sensing player in Europe, but mainly focused in Belgium. And we want to build a smart 3D tree map. It's from the Amaya project that Hans was saying. That's from the Flemish government, who promotes AI for the benefit of the society. I'm from the Urban Forestry Lab. This is the College University of Vives, and I will have three. I will put this away. I have three answers to three questions. What are we going to do? Why are we doing it? And how are we going to do it? So the first thing is, this is what we are aiming to do. This is a tree crown detection, especially of mainly in urban areas. We're going to use, we use this machine learning, the aerial imagery and airborne LiDAR. Of course, LiDAR is the key element. It's just it's laser impulse that generates a height model, and because of this height model, we can detect the trees. Just a little bit more zooming in. So what we are trying to do is make sure that we can detect all the trees in an urban area. And you can see here, this is an algorithm that is, this is in the Netherlands. There are other countries that already have done this, but there's a slight different approach that we are trying to detect those canopy things. So you see here a lot of trees, and the algorithm makes irregular forms on which is the crown. So we have to validate this on the terrain, and that's when AI comes in handy. So, but this is what we actually want. We have a 2D representation. This is the canopy cover, but you also have this in 3D. So what we are trying to do is putting this into this, because 3D is better for understanding the environment. For example, what is the volume of the tree, but also how much shade, if there's we place a new tree, new trees in an urban area, what will be the impact on shade, for example, that we can modulate. Of other companies can modulate this if they have those kind of data. So you get an idea on what are we trying to do. And second question was, why are we doing this? Well, it's all about a volume and of the stem for carbon stock, and also about the crown. So you see here two pictures. The one on the left is a nice tree in Antwerp, and it's here. Those trees make a lot of ecosystem services, and the two important ecosystem services. An ecosystem service is a service that a tree, in this aspect here, a tree delivers for the society, for the city actually. So the two most important ones are cooling effect, because of climate change. The cities become increasingly hotter because of the urban heat island effect. And the second one is stormwater management. So a lot of trees can, the soil beneath it can buffer water during peak water, stormwater. And that is a good way that we want to maximize ecosystem services for trees. And on the other hand, you see here a nice platanus, and that tree has a lot of carbon in it. So if you can know what is the carbon stock in it, we can integrate trees in climate change plans for cities. So basic idea, it's about the volume of the stem and of the crown. It's not about the number of trees, not only the number of trees is important, but it's actually about the volume, because the volume makes sure helps us to deliver those ecosystem services. So what we are trying to do with this map, and essentially what our lab is trying to do, is to maximize this in space and in time. And in space, it means that you make sure that the tree can grow as big as it should been like in nature, because a lot of trees are planted in a small area, which they cannot fully grow at their full potential. And time, that means that a lot of trees are cut down just before they are starting to make those ecosystem services at a nice level. You see here, this black line, this is the benefits of the tree during the time. And mostly when we are dealing with trees are, the average street tree depends on the numbers and literature, but it's around 30 years. That is something which is very young. And that's around here. So when the tree starts to make those very nice ecosystem services, we tend to cut them down. So what we need to do is to make sure that this flat line here, that we can stretch that in time, make this as long as possible and make it as high as possible. And high, I mean, if it goes very high and the y axis. So that is what the reason why we do it. A little bit more into detail. For example, we only have 10 minutes, but a very interesting reason why we should have 2D map of a canopy cover is for an urban forestry index. I will get to this in the next slides, but also for policy reasons. So you have an evolution, like you see here in 2015, it was like this, and in 2019, it has already improved or not improved. The middle dot is a slider to put it to see the difference, but that's just a print screen now. And it makes sure that for policymakers, now you have real goals that you can, real data to to make good policy plans. For example, the average tree canopy cover in the Netherlands is around 16%. That means that 16% of the area is covered with trees. So a policymaker can have an ambitious plan to say, let's bring this in my legislation, for example, the next 6 years, let's bring it to 20%. That is a very realistic way of doing it, an effective way for climate change, because as I mentioned before, it's about those crown volume, and this 2D representation of the tree canopy cover makes it very real and very tangible. It also helps, and that is one of the reasons why we are doing this AI smart tree map, is for public awareness. So people can see where the trees are situated. Of course, you can see this on an aerial photo, but with this, like you can see here, it's very intuitive then where the trees are and where the trees are not. So this is a third reason why we do it. And also, let's stay ahead in European Pact. So there are a lot of other countries who already have those maps, and we need them for our climate resilient cities. So that's also a reason. Now, just one zooming into one reason why we're doing this is we want to make an urban forestry ID. And one is an urban forestry ID is a set of parameters that we can screen to see if a city is tree-minded, tree green or not. So tree canopy cover is just one of those parameters to see if the city is green. So you have other parameters like the health or the soil index and so on. But basically, it's just one of those parameters that we can use. And we have the idea, and I think the minds are getting into this in a few European cities, that we must come to an urban forestry idea so we can benchmark other cities and benchmark what is actually a green city. We focus only on trees, so you can expand it to urban green as a whole, but just in this context, just now for trees. So that was the reason why. And third one is the workflow. How are we going to do it, and how are we going to use AI to deal with this? So there are two major different approaches to make such a map. The first one is the rule-based, is the very simple. It's not actually machine learning, but a very simple. Just you follow a set of rules, and the other one is the deep learning tool. So below here in blue, you see very simple how we are going to do it. First of all, we're going to extract the surface occupied by vegetation, and then we're going to extract the tree crowns. And then we are going to vectorize those polygons to make that percentage of tree crown cover, like I mentioned before, which was in the Netherlands 16%. And okay. So the first
Bregt, just a brief interruption.
Yeah.
If you could wrap up for the timing, that would be great. So just 1 or 2 minutes left, and then
all right,
go to the next.
Okay, I'm already. I'm almost finished. So we're gonna make a canopy height model for this, so that I will not go into detail for this. And to go from this extraction of 3 crowns, you can do this rule-based or by deep learning. So we're going to put in aerial pictures, and we're going to use citizens science who will draw those crowns on a picture, just on an aerial photo, and they will have to inventorize the species, the segmentation, the diameter, and so on, to make sure that that the algorithm, the deep learning algorithm, can actually detect those crowns. Because what is the major problem is those lines here. How many trees can the algorithm detect? So this is a process called segmentation, and the citizen science have to validate those lines on the field, and they have to feed it into the deep learning algorithm and see if we get better results than the rule-based algorithm. So essentially, this is what we want. And with this data, the last slide is that we want to make correlations between the crown volume and the diameter at breast height. So with the scientists, a citizen scientist, we can make sure that we can calculate the crown volume, and those crown volume we can put in like an I3, and we can calculate the ecosystem services. So this is in a very short way what I was trying to say. Thanks.
Super, thank you very much, Bregt, and it looks a very promising project. And maybe also to wrap up maybe these 3 cases, it immediately strikes me that, of course, given the broad field, so to speak, of contributing and trying to make technology work and contribute in order to get closer to the SDGs, there is something that strikes or immediately, I think, in the 3 presentation that maybe is also bridging the next intervention of Eloenora. But you immediately see that, of course, there are a lot of different stakeholders that come into play. You make use of citizens gathering data, but you also have a lot of different stakeholders. But mainly then on a policy level, trying to find standardizations, like with the example of Bregt also, how do you going to measure impact, and actually try to find standards to show, improve, and share them specific of these standards and methodologies. That's maybe also one of the major challenges that I think Eloenora in her work also when it comes to advising and policy making at UNESCO level is facing when it comes to ethics and applying technology for the good. So Eloenora, looking forward for your intervention here, and hopefully maybe already some answers to one of these questions.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning. In my case, good afternoon, good evening. Many thanks for inviting UNESCO to this important event. Especially, I would like to thank to my dear friend Ricardo for inviting me. It is a pleasure to present to you UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence as a way to guarantee that this truly transformative technology is developed and used for the benefit of humanity. We all know, and we also could see it in the previous presentations, that artificial intelligence is impacting our life in almost every domain, ranging from education, health, transport, justice, marketing, agriculture, and many more. Artificial intelligence may radically change the world we live in, but it is the ethics behind it that will determine what that world will look like. UNESCO, as a global laboratory of ideas, standard setter, policy advisor, and capacity builder, is playing a lead role in facilitating international cooperation and shaping the future of AI, and mandated by its member states, UNESCO developed the first global normative instrument in the form of a recommendation on the ethics of AI. This recommendation was adopted by UNESCO's General Conference at its 41st session on November 2021, and we are proud and honored to say that it was approved by 193 member states. This instrument translates the what of ethics of AI into the how of the relevant policy action, offering concrete pathways for the realization of the ethical framework of universal principles and values. But why the ethical approach is important? First of all, ethics is about making explicit the values that lie behind our policies, choices, and actions, and applying this to human decision-making and human rights are the basic common ground. Second, AI technologies are not value neutral. They should be firmly grounded in certain common foundational human values, and in particular, the international human rights framework. AI technologies are always evolving and needs to be constantly accompanied by ethics as a dynamic process to ensure that human rights and fundamental freedoms are always protected. And lastly, ethical frameworks provide a response in case where regulation does not or cannot exist. But you may ask, what makes this new instrument different from the other regulations that already exist in this field at national and regional levels? What is its added value? This recommendation is innovative and valuable for its global scope. It is the first global instrument. It's a strong language because it has emphasis on how, because it contains policy areas. It is focused on the entire life cycle of AI systems, and it addresses issues as data policy, gender, and environment, which were not taken into account before in other instruments, or at least not with the importance that we did it at UNESCO. And as we could see before, those are really important issues. The aims of the recommendations are first, to guide the development and use of AI in a way that benefits all of humanity and promotes sustainable development and peace. And second, to assist member states in facing the changes stemming from AI technologies and preparing their response. The key issue at stake here is trustworthiness, as we saw in the video, the previous video, and integrity. That the users of AI have trust and confidence in the good intentions of the developers and regulators, of the scientists and the government officials. The values that serve as the foundation of the global ethical frameworks on AI are respect, protection, and promotion of human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, environment and ecosystem flourishing, ensuring diversity and inclusiveness, and living in harmony and peace. And furthermore, the recommendation has important principles that constitute the global framework, which are proportionality, safety and security, fairness and non-discrimination, sustainability, privacy and data protection, human oversight and determination, transparency and explainability, responsibility and accountability, awareness and literacy, and multi-stakeholder and adaptive governance and collaboration. As you can see, the recommendation represents a comprehensive ethical framework that comprehends the full spectrums of human rights architecture, from the principle of human dignity to the issue of inclusivity, fairness, equality, and non-discrimination. And it does so by maintaining focus on all stages of the AI system lifecycle. Critically, the recommendation is not meant to be a mere declaration of principles. Rather, it is offering policy pathways to turn the principles into action. This can be achieved through the capacity building instrument that helps countries tap into the power of AI, such as the AI readiness evaluation tools for developing custom-tailored national AI strategies and plans of action. The capacity building initiatives also include advanced ethical impact assessment tools and due diligence and oversight mechanisms. These instruments will be designed by UNESCO in collaboration with a range of partners, including member state, private sector, and the civil society, to help countries identify impacts on human rights, in particular on the rights of women and girls, vulnerable groups, labor rights, and the environment and ecosystems. But while every policy area contains actions with interesting implication, I would like to draw your attention to a policy area that I consider absolutely critical within the overall ethical framework on AI, which is gender. Gender equality features prominently in the recommendation, and it is also one of UNESCO's 2 global priorities. So we are deeply concerned that it is in the digital industries, including the AI systems, where one of the most acute gender disparities persist. We are convinced that if technologies are not developed and applied in a gender-responsive way, they are likely to reproduce and reinforce existing discriminatory social norms and practice against women. That is why the recommendation is important in our fight to address gender gaps when it comes to artificial intelligence, and we developed a separate policy action area dedicated to gender. What are the concrete policy pathways that we are suggesting to the AI actors in order to address gender gaps? I will just say a few of them. First, we are making sure that the ethical impact assessments designed to evaluate the impact of AI on society and individuals will include a transversal gender perspective. Second, we are promoting policies that ensure that digital technologies and artificial intelligence fully contribute to achieve gender equality, and that the rights and fundamental freedoms of girls and women, including their safety and integrity, are not violated at any stage of the system life cycle. Third, we recognize that without funding, all these will remain idealistic aspirations. We need action, and action needs money. We are therefore suggesting that countries dedicate funds from the public budgets linked to financing gender-related streams and ensure that national digital policies include a gender action plan. Fourth, we are addressing the issue of wage and equal opportunity gaps at the workplace, which have been a major obstacle for the economic empowerment of women for decades, and we know that. And lastly, we are addressing the issues of gender stereotyping, calling on countries to make sure that discriminatory bias are not translated into the AI systems. How to move forward from articulation to implementation? Well, in today's societies, the ability to leverage digital technology is increasingly indispensable to an individual's well-being. Without an ability to control technology, people risk being controlled by it or isolated from local, national, and global communities. That is why the recommendation as a global normative framework ensures these efforts not only in economically affluent parts of the world, but everywhere, even in the least developed countries, through a global collaboration that involves everyone: governments, international organizations, private sector, NGOs, etc. So having the opportunity to present it today to you I think it's another big step to reach its implementation, and that is why I would like to thank you for inviting us and for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Eloenora, and all the speakers in this event today. I'm Ricardo Chavarriaga from the Clare office, Zurich, and I will be hosting the discussion part of this event, and I will invite all speakers to turn on their videos for moving from the presentation of these use cases and the emerging governance frameworks onto a discussion on what are the challenges of implementing these technologies for the common goods and the lessons learned through the different experiences that you all have had. And we started the session today talking about AI for good, which is something that we hear more and more often. And I would like to start the discussion on the point on how do we know that our technologies are actually being used for the good? How do we measure the performance and the impact that these technologies have? And how can you, as an organization, when deploying these projects, identify the metrics for success? So, and these are of course very challenging questions, and we have a limited time, but yeah, I would like to start sharing the processes and conclusions that each of you have had in this topic. And let's start with the same order of presentation today. So how do we measure the impact that we bring in and the added value of these technologies? Starting with Florian.
Thank you, Ricardo. Yeah, great question, and difficult for us to respond to answer that because today, yes, we have different work stream with the support of AI in TDH, not specifically on Surge, which is the subject I presented today. So. Of course, we have specific indicators for health in low and middle income countries that we follow, that we regularly follow, and in our experience in different projects, in particular in digital health in Burkina Faso, we always try to pilot something, then measure through an independent evaluation. And in Burkina Faso, it was the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine that conducted a really great study to measure these changes that we brought with the digital health, and it will be the same for artificial intelligence in Surge, when we'll have the opportunity to use the artificial intelligence with Surge. So yeah, this is what I can do, what I can say on this topic.
Thank you, Florian. Astrid?
Yeah, sure. And it's actually a great question, and something that we even ourselves didn't come up with a final answer, because every day we are challenging ourselves on how should we measure the impact of our action and so on. Then when you work in technology, you often tend to look at what type of technology you developed, how robust is the model and all those kind of things, which is very important. But when you start to work on the ground, which is very also important, and by experience, I realized that actually working like all the management of the project represent more than 70-80% of the projects versus 20-30% of development at the end of the day, because especially in emerging countries, you're working with different type of stakeholders, and then you work with funders where they have a mission, and then when you go on the ground, you realize that the needs are quite different. So to me, and I think my folks at Dalberg will also agree with me, is more on the user adoption. You can develop the best technology, but if no one is going to use it, then you tremendously failed. So for that, we actually developed different way to measure it, and we have data governance tool that are embedded within the tool that is going to measure different indicators, such as the number of logging, the number of indicator used, what are the time between every session, what type of user is using the tools, and so on. And based on that, you can actually understand how the user adoption worked, and how can you improve your tools to make it more sustainable and more tangible for the end user. But it goes together with a whole curriculum of capacity building, with training and curriculum and so on. And at the end of the day, to me, a success is when you have a meeting of stakeholders. So for instance, a meeting of Ministry of Health with different partners from the ground, like UNICEF and so on, taking decision during meetings based off insight that are generated from the dashboard or the tool that you develop. To me, that's the final, I would say, key and image of a success, is when they use your tool to take decision and more align action. So yes, I hope it answered your question.
Thank you, Astrid. Bregt, your thoughts on this, on the topic of metrics and impact assessment?
Well, I developed 3 management plans for cities and municipalities. So This is close to the implementation and how to measure it. I think if decision makers like policymakers integrate, like Astrid was saying, that map, those numbers, the canopy cover, into their climate plans. If they work with numbers, I mean volume of square meters. If they integrate this into their policy, that will be for me a factor to measure it. And the final goal of the project that we want to do is to access this data through the Inspire guidance line, how you say it. But we have in Flanders a database for GIS maps, and we would like to make this accessible for everybody, for every civilian, so that they can use it for awareness. So yeah, that's actually a good question. I'm not 100%, cannot 100% answer that question immediately.
Yeah, thanks, Bregt. And I think there is one very important point is that the definition of these metrics is an open question in practically every deployment of these systems, because we have an emerging technology and we have complex phenomena that is triggered when society uses that technology, which brings, say, the importance of the performance metrics that we may have from the technical aspects to the recommendations that we may have from an ethical and social perspective, which is the goal of the recommendations, such as the one that UNESCO has developed. And here is probably my next question is how these emerging governance frameworks that we see at the level of ethical recommendations, like the UNESCO, that is very clear in terms of policy, but it's complemented by other, say, more technical areas like GDPR here in Europe and other data protection laws in other parts of the country. How organizations can put in practice these governance mechanisms, how ready they are, and say to what extent the organizations are ready, and what is necessary for organizations to be ready to implement these recommendations. And here I would like to alter the order, and maybe starting from the UNESCO perspective on how do they foresee the implementation and adoption, and what is necessary for organizations to implement, who should be involved, and then for the different use cases, how do they see integration of these ethical guidelines into their developments. So, Eloenora?
Thank you, Ricardo. Well, this is the question because we have just developed the recommendation and we are starting the implementation of the recommendation. And for that, at UNESCO, as I said during my presentation, but I will say it more clearly now, we are working in two instruments. First, we are developing a rating assessment methodology to assist interested member states in identifying their status at specific moments of their readiness trajectory along a continuum of dimensions. And second, we ensure support for interested member states in terms of developing a UNESCO methodology for ethical impact assessment of AI technologies, sharing of best practices, assessment guidelines, and other mechanisms and analytical work. But the thing is that in this implementation, we are all involved. Even if the recommendation is directed to member states, it is also to private sector, to NGOs, to everywhere. We are all involved in that. And we also know that those stakeholders are also as important as member states, because they are funding many of the AI projects. So we started in terms of member states last week, launching the recommendation in your country, in Colombia. And we are also starting having different meetings with the private sector, and in order to start the implementation. We don't know how ready are states to implement that, and that is why we are working on these two tools. But we know there are. We have like a long way to go, and we are here to support. We are ready to. We have all the necessary tools in order to start working on the implementation.
Thank you, Eloenora. And let me remind the audience that they can put their questions on the Slido platform during the event, and I will take these questions after this round. And here you can see the link to it. So maybe Astrid, your thoughts on how organizations like yours can integrate these ethical recommendations, or what experiences have you had on integrating these ethical guidelines into your work?
Yes, right. So our tool at design, they are compliant with GDPR by design. So that it's a no-go question, we're used to work as such. But then what we do is actually we create governance framework for every project ourselves. And that's why with every project we deploy, we have a local team, people working with the different stakeholders, trying to understand what is the current framework and how can we improve it. So that's why we often go further than just governance, but we also do governance and accountability framework, because you can put the best governance framework out of there if there is no accountability from people of who is responsible of what, when, and why. Then you will not have people just following the governance framework. So that's why. So it's very hard to answer to that question in a very short amount of time, because it really depends from one project to another one, what type of data you are dealing with, what type of stakeholders, because you can have like a project with an amazing data inside that can be used very differently depending on who is going to be the end user. So we might be more strict on the governance if we think that the stakeholders can use the data in the wrong way, versus we might be more flexible depending on the end user. So yes, that's, I would say, again, part of any project we do. You always have the block related to governance, which is like a continuous process, and start right from the beginning when you start to gather information about the ecosystem and so on. And then towards the end, where you really come with a framework, like an actual document that is shared and acknowledged by every stakeholders, and knows that what are the responsibilities of everyone when it comes to usage of the data, and then also protection of the data.
Thank you, Astrid. This is very important, the development of these governance frameworks, and as you mentioned, to do it as early as possible during the project life cycle. Florian.
Yeah, great question. Indeed, and in our projects, when we collect personal or individual data, of course, we have to consider the national legal framework, which is not always fully defined actually in the low and middle income countries, so it could be complicated on this aspect. Then we have to consider the own policy that we have. For instance, in Terre des Hommes, we are developing an internal policy regarding the data of our beneficiaries. We have also to consider the policy of our donors, because of course sometimes it's more constrained. There are more constraints from our donors that want to be compliant with GDPR, even if we are not in Europe, for instance. So there are a lot of things to consider. In the field of health, of course, our beneficiaries are really vigilant about the destination of their data, of its data. So it's really complicated regarding that, and we always try to work within the framework of research protocol to be sure that that the usage of the data are limited in the time and in the objectives. And we try also to, let's say, today our projects are not to deliver individual services, but much more to deliver general services to districts, to the central government, or to his facility, but not directly to the individuals. So it means that we use only anonymized data and aggregated data. So it's a bit easier for us to deal with that.
Thank you, Florian. Bregt, with your experience on integrating these ethical recommendations in your projects?
Well, I agree with Florian. For us, it's much more easier because we work with anonymous data. We work with open source data. For example, the two major things that we use is aerial imagery, which is open source, ready available for everybody in Flanders. And the LiDAR data is also open source for everybody. So we use those two databases to make something new, and it's just a layer for trees. So it's not personal data. Of course, private trees will be in it, but then you have to blur all the aerial imagery too, which is not going to happen because the resolution is low, so it remains anonymous. And to answer also the question, last week I had a workshop on the ethics of AI. So I'm not full-time busy with AI. So it really helps for developers to get workshop, to get instructed on those ethics. And yeah, for me, that was a great way to deal with the data from the citizens that we are going to use. We have to anonymize that. We have to be very open what we are going to do, and we have to explain what the engine room is from the AI, so they don't see it as a Terminator. So just some basic things that if you communicate well, I think not a lot of problems with that. But once again, we are having data which is open source and anonymous.
Yeah, thank you, Bregt. And yeah, here there are several common lines that come on the involvement of different stakeholders in the definition of this governance metrics and accountability. That is a key aspect when we try to develop this technology in a responsible manner. Let's take one of the questions from the audience regarding informed consent. And this is probably more for Astrid and Florian. How do you deal with consent? There are some examples made here on the possibility of forwarding health information to government or public bodies, or regarding the data that is gathered from the use of phones or from a population. So how do you deal with consent in your projects? Maybe starting with Astrid.
Yes, right. Maybe something I forgot also to mention is that we only work with aggregate and anonymized data. So we don't get to the level of personal data. But still, when we, for instance, we have different type of project, but when we did the one to deploy the gender prediction toolkits, when we were running the phone survey always starts with like the explanation of why are we running that survey, how the data is going to be used, and getting the consent, collecting the consent from the person who has been reached out. If the person say no, obviously we just finalize the phone survey. But indeed, like as I said, so we work only with anonymized and aggregate data, but still there is also always that question of, are we eligible to work with those aggregate and anonymized data? And that's why we go through a whole process of putting in place NDA with the telecom providers. So it took us years to establish those relationships, and we are very in a position where we had to go through all that legal process with MNO, so mobile network operator, to make sure that we are compliant in the way we handle those data, are compliant to the different regulations such as GDPR and those kind of things.
Thank you. Florian?
Yeah, good question for us, because yeah, we are working with patients. So in the case of IMCI, clearly that's young patients less than 5 years old. So it's difficult to get their consent. But of course, we have to get the consent of the mother if she is bringing the children to his facility. And in low and middle income countries, of course, it's a bit complicated to generalize this kind of consent for each consultation. So today, this is oral consultation, and because it's not actually it's not needed when the objective is to improve the quality of care. You do not have to ask the consent of the patient in Burkina Faso. But at the moment you want to use this data for research purposes, or to use it even anonymized with AI, etc. Of course, you have to get the consent and the explicit consent of the patient. So it's something we are trying to deal with in Burkina Faso, and we have to take care of this, because the use and the success of the tool is a balance between the facility of which the health worker used the tool and the obligation we have regarding the law. So we always try to simplify, but some we cannot implement all the mechanism that could take much more time to do a consultation, for instance. So this is a really complicated balance between all these things.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fern. I think this is extremely important. The reality that we need to balance multiple variables here in order to have an impactful, responsible technology. And today we are trying to identify what are the experiences that you have had as organizations, both on the deployment of technology and in the development of governance mechanisms. And here at CLARE, we are really interested in identifying what are these transferable lessons from each of these organizations that can become a knowledge to be shared with new organizations that want to use these technologies in the future. And we have 2 minutes, and I would like to hear one sentence from each of you on how can we make systems that are sustainable, that are not only responsible, but also sustainable, that these interventions are not just a single point in time, but then in the future they disappear, or they became outdated, or basically not usable. So just one sentence. I know is a question that we can spend days on it, but just one sentence that we can use as a seed for our next discussion on this topic. And I will commit to organize something where we can follow on that. So let's start with Bregt. How can we make this sustainable?
Integrate the tree map into climate resilience plans.
Thank you. Astrid?
Start from the user needs, not from the technology.
Florian?
Yeah, the same. I think start from the user needs and not focus on tool, but much more on process and usage actually of what we create.
Thank you. Eloenora?
Well, it's difficult to be the last one, but I think they will only be sustainable if they are good for humanity. I mean, we should be worried about that because those technologies are really, in an ethics way, worrying us. So they need to be useful for humanity.
Thank you very much, Eloenora, Florian, Astrid, Bregt, and Hans, who's joining me here, as well as all other the rest of our team that's behind the curtains and making this possible, while we address this very important question: how can we make a technology that brings solutions? How do we really build technology while remaining focused on solving a need and keeping the human and environment at the center of our thoughts? This is, of course, a long-term discussion that we will need to continue. And this is our intention here during this EU AI Week. We have other events that are dealing with other aspects of developing AI, including the innovation ecosystem for AI-driven organizations, the role of science as in diplomacy, given the current geopolitical situation, as well as how to promote a new generation of researchers that is not only excellent regarding the technical qualities, but is also aware and capable to address it in a respectful and ethically aligned way, as well as a landscape of current initiatives working on these topics like Claire and EU robotics joint work, as well as the EU-supported networks of excellence. So thank you very much for sharing your experience, for joining us today and help us in this long-term work of co-creating that technology that can make a better future for the humanity and the world altogether. We are convinced that by working together, we can find answers to the difficult questions that we have been addressing today. And by giving everybody a voice, is the only way in which we can really realize the potential of these transformative technologies and make a better future for ourselves and for the new generations. Thank you very much for joining us today, and feel free to reach out to continue this dialogue in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.